Hello again, thanks for joining me. So today we've got two models to look at, and the reason we've got these two is that they're very similar. One is number R140 and the name of the locomotive is Tranquil. The other is R2036 and this locomotive is named St Frusquin, and they're both A3 Pacific locomotives. What Hornby has done here is made two limited edition models, but cleverly what they've done is just tried to get more money out of us, because these models are actually both Flying Scotsmen and they've just been repainted in a different colour and given a different name and number and sold as limited editions. This top link range they no longer do. I think it might actually be called Railroad now. I'm not 100% sure about that, but both of these two models come from a time when Hornby models were made here in the UK. So we're going to have a look at both of them today. I did get these second hand, and you can see, for example, in this one we've got some scuffing down the side of the box here, this one to a lesser degree, but they both look in very good condition. So I'm really optimistic about what we're going to find inside these boxes. But they are two different types of boxes. The one at the back has got a plastic sleeve so you can see the model. The one at the front doesn't, and it shows two other models which are not this one inside the box. So let's open them up and see what we've got inside. We'll start off with Tranquil. So here we have the model in the polystyrene sleeve, the cardboard lid just lifted straight off, no problem at all. And straight away what you can see is that this is quite an interesting colour combination. It's very different from the usual apple green of Flying Scotsman, this kind of purpley blue colour, and it's got some attractive lining all the way around it. You can see the name Tranquil here, along with a number, and also on the tender it says British Railways. So let's get these out and have a look. So first up, the little bag of extras, and wouldn't you believe it, it's our old friends, the fireman and the driver. We get these in almost every single Hornby model, and it's always the same two guys. And you also have the vacuum pipes in there as well. We have this certificate of authentication for the model Tranquil as well. So it has some information here about the history of the locomotive, and in this instance it's saying this is a limited edition of 1500 units, and again Simon's signature here and the number, which is 456 out of those 1500. And here we have the model, and it's quite an interesting and attractive model. This colour scheme is really quite bright and eye-catching. I did notice when I took this out that this is tender drive. This is the heavy part. This is just being pushed along, and you can see that the valve gear just moves like this when I push it, because there's no drive on here. There is a connector between the locomotive and the tender, so it is picking up power from here and sending it back to the tender. But apart from that, this is just being pushed along. So let's start by looking at the front of the locomotive here, and straight away you can see the handsome lines of this A3 Pacific. This model has been around for some time now, and obviously there's 1,000,001 Flying Scotsman models around. I've even done a review of one. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. So here at the buffer beam you can see the red painted on here. There is a little bit of overspill just on the black just there. That's a bit unusual for Hornby to have that. And here you can see this white line which runs all the way along the bottom part of the locomotive here, all the way to the back. And that's actually quite nicely applied. The front pony truck has a lot of movement here. You can see these wheels. I think I've been quite lucky with both of these two models because they look very clean. I'm not even sure if they've been used before. And these wheels here certainly don't have any dirt on them. And you'll see the pony truck has this big Hornby coupling on it. It's the bane of my life, these couplings. But this one has a screw there, so you can take that out. Not a lot of detail on the buffer beam here. There's an indication of a hook for the screw link, but it's not that well defined. There's a hole there for the vacuum pipe, but there's not much else. Looking up on the smoke box door, it does have these extra handrails added in wire. There's one across the front of the smoke box here, and there's one that runs the whole length of the boiler. The number there, 60071, is printed, and it's not too badly done. There's not a great amount of detail on the smoke box door there, but what is there is quite nicely presented. And here you can see the shed plate picked out in gold, but there's no writing on that, but it's nice that it's been picked out anyway. There's a fair degree of rivet detail and hatches here around the chimney and the front of the boiler. And as we move down the side of the boiler, you can see the change in colour and these red ribs, which have been applied pretty good. Even here where we have this pipework running over the rib, they haven't just painted over those, so that looks quite convincing. It's nice that they've done that. And you can see here that the red in these little wheel arches is also presented nicely as well. So the review I did of the Flying Scotsman model, which again was a limited edition, the white was applied in here and it wasn't done that well. You can see the nameplate here. It's fairly decent. It's not a great one, but it's okay. And finally, as we reach the cab area, you can see these molded handrails here have been picked out in white as well, which is quite nice. And it has this window window here glazed as well, and it's flush fit and it has a surround air in gold. You can also see that the front window there is also glazed. Up top here we've got a fair amount of detail on the cab roof, including some rivet detail. You've got these two whistles which are added on parts which are in metal, and as we look down the boiler here you can see the mould mark between the two halves of this model, but it's not that pronounced. I've seen worse on some Hornby models. So that's an acceptable amount, I think, on this one. So looking down at the running gear, like I said about this pony, it's got a lot of movement in it, but there's no detail on this piece here. The pistons are acceptable, and then you have the valve gear in very bright chrome. There's quite a lot of it on this locomotive, and it's super bright and quite chunky as well. More modern locomotives from Hornby have this dulled as well, so it looks more prototypical. You can also see that the wheels are very chrome too, with these plastic inserts though. There's some moulding of brake blocks here, and they're in line with the wheels, and that's always a really nice thing to see. And finally, the end truck here is also cantilevered, and it has a lot of movement as well, both up and down and left and right. But you do see some detail on here of steps and also spring detail and axle boxes there. And here is the connection to the tender. It's one of these sprung loaded ones, which, you know, it does have a bit of an issue, I think, because if you're starting to put this into reverse, it often takes a couple of seconds when the tender sets off and then the steam locomotive follows it, so it's a bit unrealistic. It does help this locomotive get around really tight corners and continue to send power to the tender. Inside the cab there's a representation of detail on the back of the boiler there, but there's not a lot of detail really on view here inside the cab, so the driver and fireman might have a bit of a sad time inside here. The valve gear moves quite freely. Obviously, like I said, the drive comes from the tender, so these are just free rolling and they run really quite well. So let's have a look at the tender. So this is a fairly standard tender from Hornby. This one obviously in the same blue colour with a handrail here picked out in white, which is just moulded in, and that looks quite nice. It's got this transfer of these lines all the way around, and the words British Railways, that's very clearly applied. You can see that there's no fuzziness there at all. Around the back there's another handrail here picked out in white, as well as the handrails in the corner. They're just included in the moulding of this. They aren't extra added on parts, and there's some indication of footsteps going up the back, as well as lamp brackets moulded in as well. You can see the buffer beam here, again painted in red, plastic buffers added on. These aren't sprung, that's before that became a thing. It's good that the definition between the red and the black is pretty good as well. And looking down here, this part here is just a one-piece moulding, but it has a lot of detail of springs and axle boxes. At the very back, this final wheel is on a little bit of a cantilever to help it get round corners, but you can see it's an integrated Hornby coupling here, so you can't change this for anything else. And here we have the drive. It goes to the two outer axles here. This one in the middle is just free rolling. You can see it has some traction tires here as well. Up at the top, we have this railing running all the way around the top of the tender, and that is actually quite a nice piece. I think it might actually be metal. And then you have this hatch for the water and obviously the coal, and as normal it's full to the brim with coal, and it looks quite convincing, this moulding. I have seen better ones. This one's not too bad at all. And finally here we have some details, some other hatches, and where the fireman gets his coal from the tender, but obviously this one is completely empty, so he needs to do some shoveling from the back, I think. You can see this little stud here, which is where the power comes from the front of the locomotive and comes here into the tender. So these two pieces should just pop apart. That's quite easily done. And here we have the good old famous Ringfield motor. This one does have some scoring there on the motor, so it has been used this, but you really wouldn't believe it from the state of the wheels and the condition of this model. And here you have the gearbox running the two outer wheels. So it's quite a simple affair, this Ringfield motor. I actually quite like these. They're not too bad at all. They seem to run pretty good, and if you keep them clean, they seem to do sterling work for a long time. They're quite robust as well. So that's a simple push fit, and it's back together. So that's the first of our models. So I'll put this to one side and we can have a look at the other one. So here we have St Frusquin. So let's get this opened up and have a look. So in this one, we've got a certificate of authentication, which is great. I don't know what it's authenticating, but it's certainly saying that you have a locomotive. This one obviously is St Frusquin, and it gives you some details about why it was called this. So apparently it was a racehorse that won the 2,000 guineas in 1896. So that's quite interesting. It tells you about the history of this locomotive, how it was originally an A1, but then later was outfitted as an A3. And this is an experimental livery, which only was applied to this model for 4 years between 1948 and 1952. A limited production run of 2,000 units, and it has the signature of Simon Cole and details that this is number 1253 of 2000. This is quite a poor certificate though, and it has been folded in a very odd odd way. It isn't square. I don't know whether that came out of the factory like that. I think it probably did. And here's the model in the polystyrene tray, very similar to the first one. So let's get this out. And guess what? Yep, we've got these two guys again. So here we have our model, and unsurprisingly it looks almost identical to the one we've just had a look at. Again, this one is looking in very good condition. It doesn't seem to be any wear on it at all, and as with the first one, this is free moving because the drive is in the tender. Just looking over it very quickly, there doesn't seem to be any difference at all between this and the other model, apart from obviously the number and the name, and that holds true also for the tender, which is exactly the same with the same drive setup and the ring field motor. So let's give one of these a try on a piece of test track. So we've got Tranquil here on the test track, so let's give it some power and see what happens. So Tranquil here ran fine, no problems at all, and I'm going to make the assumption that the other one is also going to run the same because they're both in very good condition and they both have the same motor in the tender. The ring field motor gets a lot of grief from people about not being very good, but I actually quite like it. I think if you look after it, it runs fine. It's a sterling performer, and considering that these are actually quite old models, it's still running really good. So overall, these two models from Hornby in the top link range are quite an interesting model to look at because of the colour. These are very indicative models of what Hornby was like when he still made models here in the UK, in that they've cleverly come up with two new models that they can sell based on the Flying Scotsman, which they already have, and all they had to do was just mould it in a different colour and do some different painting and numbering. In that respect, it's quite a cheaply made model, and therefore, would you think that this is something special? I know that the limited edition, and this is quite an interesting colour, and you don't see it very often, but it really is just another Flying Scotsman at the end of the day, and I'm sure there are other models. In fact, I've got another one coming up soon, which is another Flying Scotsman derivative. So some of the things I like about this model is, obviously the colour is really bright and interesting. It does have limited appeal though, because it was only available for a very short time on these locomotives, and if you're not modelling that era, then these might actually look a bit odd. But it is an attractive colour, and the trim of the red ribs on the side here has been done very well, and the combination of the white, the black and the blue and the red all works really well together. These have an acceptable level of detail on them. They've got the wire handrails running down the side here, the metal whistles at the top, the nice railing around the tender at the back. So it's all very acceptable and good enough as a model. Some of the bad things on here obviously is the coupling on the front. I don't like these big Hornby couplings on the front, but it's good that you can actually take this one off with the screw there. There's no detail on the front pony truck either, so that's quite sad. And the valve gear, I mean, it's acceptable, but it just seems excessively big, and it's definitely the wrong colour because it's just far too bright. And we talked about couplings as well. So at the back on the tender, the coupling can't be removed or changed to anything else. So you're stuck with this big Hornby coupling here as well. So I guess the question you've got then is, should you consider buying these models? I would suspect that they would probably go for a premium price over something like a Scotsman model, which there are thousands and thousands of, whereas these are limited edition, obviously. So therefore you will be paying a premium, and that premium is all about the colour on them. If you do like the colour, then this is an interesting addition to add to your collection, and possibly rather instead of just going for the bog standard Flying Scotsman, you could maybe seek out one of these and have something a bit different. The colour is very appealing, but it's not for everyone. It does look a bit like Thomas the Tank Engine in places. For me, I don't like these colours. I prefer the more muted colours, something a bit more realistic. And I know this is a realistic colour scheme, but really it's verging just a little bit too much on the Thomas world for my liking. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found my analysis of these models interesting. If you did, please let me know in the comments below what you thought. You can also give this video a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to see more videos like this. And I'll wrap up by putting one of these locomotives on the turntable so you can see all the way around. But that's it for today. See you next time.